drive. Oh, well, I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Can't twist myself at the spine. Don't wanna overthink it, baby. It's just twist your body and mine. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, but I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stand up and speak just my mind. Oh. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're chilling wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. May I have the roll call, please?
Chair McGill,
Present?
Vice Chair Clark, Commissioner Aldana,
Present.
Commissioner Lesnar-Buxton, Commissioner Nielsen,
Present.
Commissioner Price,
Present.
Commissioner Ramsey.
Present.
All right, thank you. And before we move to changing the agenda, I would like to welcome and recognize Councilmember Santa Maria, who's with us in the audience. Thank you. Welcome. And do we have any changes to the agenda?
Chair McGill, no changes.
All right. And I did not see any written public comment other than what came in our packets. Was there anything I didn't? No. No. Okay, great. All right, that brings us to public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time for public comment will be 15 minutes. Those of you who are here to speak on an agenda item, that'll come up when we go to that agenda item. I don't have any speaker slips for public comment. Do we have anybody online?
No, Chair McGill, there's no one online.
Okay, great, thank you very much. That takes us to Commissioner Committee assignment reports. I will start on my left with Commissioner Aldana.
Nothing to report
Okay,
this month.
Okay, thank you. And then Commissioner Nielsen. So you're not on anything yet.
Nothing to report.
Watch this space. Vice Chair Clark.
I attended the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting, and we visited and discussed all the trees that are on our agenda later today.
And since both of you to my right are not on a subcommittee yet, I will stop with me. And we did have a Park Foundation meeting last week where we continued discussions of events for the band shell. So watch this space. All right, and that takes us to ceremonial items. And do we have any employee recognitions this month?
Chair McGill and commissioners, we have one of our staff members, Todd Falstrom, whose official title is Recreation Coordinator. However, he is the Aquatics Recreation Coordinator, was recognized at the City Council meeting this month for his 5 years of service.
5 years. Great. Well, as always, we need these people, and they, Todd with recreation serves a vital link, and congratulations and thank you. Summary of council actions. Hi, Jacob, welcome. Summary of council actions. Don't think, is there any, there's not, it was both very straightforward. That takes us to minutes, the recommendation being that the commission waive the reading and approve the minutes of the regular meeting of January 29th. Do we have a motion? Didn't, oh, well, okay, Commissioner Aldana,
What? So moved.
okay. Second? Second. Okay, and we have a motion and a second. Shall we, unless there's any discussion, we'll just go to a vote. Alrighty, and that takes us to trees.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners. The first Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove a coast live oak. This is located within the front setback of the property at 408 Los Robles Lane. The applicant submitted an application and listed multiple reasons for removal. There were noted concerns with just the structural condition of the tree. There were multiple limbs, sort of like with poor branch attachments, I think how we would say it, noted on the application, as well as previous conflicts with infrastructure. There was reference to a surface drain being impacted and concerns with continued issues with the tree's root system, as well as fire concern, just in general with the tree's location close to the home. The committee reviewed the tree, the application, and the reasons listed. The arborists on the committee noted that the attachments weren't ideal. That's not uncommon in the tree world, and specifically in coast live oak. There was comments from the committee that if normal maintenance was performed, it was probably a low risk of failure from like a safety perspective in terms of one of those larger limbs sort of shearing out of the canopy. The applicants have done to date a pretty great job having the tree maintained. The drainage issues were repaired, no current issues, and I think it's, general consensus from the committee's perspective is if there's a workaround that can preserve a large, healthy tree, that's typically preferred. And then, as we've seen and will continue to see and probably have, continued discussion on and related to fire concerns, certainly a concern from the applicant's perspective, but when we look at the defensible space requirements and what really constitutes a true fire hazard, this tree really doesn't check those boxes. And the coast live oak is, one of the more, I don't want to say fire resistant, but in terms of its ability to withstand fire and flammability is pretty high on that list. And after review, the committee made a recommendation to deny the request for the removal of the coast live oak at 408 Los Robles Lane.
Okay, thank you very much. So just so you understand, what I'm going to do now is just go to questions from the commission, and then we'll do public comment. All right. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Nielsen, followed by Commissioner Price.
Mr. Slack, for education and context, can you describe in a little more depth what great maintenance looks like on a tree of this nature and what needs to be done to keep it as healthy as it is?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, if you're able to make a site visit, I think if you saw the tree, it looks like a great, healthy coast live oak. So I think that, for the most part, that what you're seeing is good maintenance, right? So what the applicants highlighted, which is a visible, what we would consider defect in the tree, you have like these three stems and they're pretty close together, and as those stems grow, they increase in diameter and they kind of press against each other, and those weaker branch attachments can be like a place where failure can occur. So what you would do is you would just maintain overextension and just the overall size of the canopy. So sort of like if you think like in a building, like a cantilever on a building can only extend so far before that structural limit is passed. And you have like mechanical failure. It's very similar in the tree world where you have, if you manage that weight and overextension that's on each of those limbs where the attachment's not ideal, you essentially can drastically reduce like any potential for failure. That would apply to any tree. That's a lot of what we're out there doing every day with the street tree management is managing weight and trying to limit overextension of things to prevent limb failure.
Thank you, Mr. Slack.
Commissioner Price.
Thank you. So two questions, both related to each other. First of all, is this area covered by the street tree master plan? And then secondly, if it is the magnolia, which was recommended, sufficient to meet that?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Price, there's reference to the tree preservation ordinance in the master plan, but it's much more heavily focused on like the public trees, so city trees, park trees. And that's true of the designation listing too, which is like an appendix of the street tree master plan. So in this instance, when the commission's reviewing setback applications, you're kind of looking at, is there a finding that can support the removal? And then if the commission determines that mitigation is necessary, then there would be review about whether the proposed species or whatever species the commission thought made practical sense. And I think historically when we look at old reviews from the commission, it's not so much about the species and more about just kind of like matching sort of like overall biomass and size. And just in sort of like plain speak, magnolia can get quite large. You know, we have a lot on the west side over on San Andres, so those are really good reference trees. So in terms of comparable size, they both, you know, can be what we would consider large shade trees.
Thank you. Anybody else? I guess my question is, I didn't want to trespass on the property, so I didn't go looping around it. In terms of defensible space, I wasn't quite sure how close the canopy got to the roof line, but what would be considered good defensible space for a tree of that nature?
Chair McGill and commissioners, I don't have like the defensible space data in front of me, and I'm not actually certain if this is within the high fire hazard zone. I think on the opposite side of Foothill, it might not be. Next time I'll make sure that I have that. I'm a little unprepared to answer that question. It's not near the structure, it's over the garage, and typically sort of general is like minimum 5 feet.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I would definitely think it was more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying they want 5 feet of clearance from
Right.
vegetation towards structure in only in high fire hazard areas.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Commissioner Nielsen and then Commissioner Aldana.
Chair McGill and staff, following the recommendation from the Street Tree Advisory Committee, if this were to be denied and the tree health were to deteriorate, what recourse do the property owners have to bring this back in front of the Street Tree Advisory Committee if health were to worsen over coming years?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen. So if we were to think about like decline towards like, you know, nearing death type of situation, there exist exemptions in the municipal code. So say the tree, for whatever reason, maybe it got diseased and its health drastically deteriorated and we knew the tree was never going to get better, then we as staff actually have the ability to write an exemption, which then doesn't require them to have a permit to remove the tree. So that's typically what happens. There exists one other exemption that staff deals with sometimes, and that's if there's a condition present, essentially like an imminent failure type of situation. So if, say, an arborist comes out and they observe something that is really significant or the tree's actively failing, like, you know, giant split in the trunk or something like that, and we're alerted, then we'll write an exemption for that too. Those are typically the two times when staff can provide an exemption that sort of excludes an applicant from having to come through this process. But at any time, an applicant can resubmit for whatever reason and have the setback tree reviewed for removal.
Thank you.
And then Commissioner Aldana.
For proper maintenance, because I did see the tree, I went over there, and you could tell that they are maintaining. For proper maintenance, you do a little trimming every how many years?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, I'd say that's pretty subjective and kind of up to like the tree owner. You know, I think when you're looking at, from managing, you know, those known structural defects, you might, you know, like a 3 to 5 year interval, you know, is what you would do. Some people trim the trees a lot more frequently than that, and you could probably push it longer than that too. I think some of it just depends on, you know, a lot of pruning, especially on private trees, is aesthetically driven too. So it really kind of depends. But I'd say a coast live oak like this, in this kind of condition, you're looking at like a 5 to 7 year pruning interval pretty regularly without much concern, you know, outside of those pruning intervals.
All right. I don't have any other questions, so I'm going to go to public comment. I have 2 speaker slips, and the first one is Daryl Gray.
Hi, I'm Daryl Gray. I'm the property owner, and I'm going to cede my time to my wife, who's going to speak to the issue.
Okay. That brings me to the second speaker, Maura Mitchell. And you told me you wanted 3 minutes. Technically, I'm not going to shut you down if you run a bit over.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And let me start by saying I appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you and talk with you about our tree. We want to replace our oak tree because we're responsible homeowners, we're responsible neighbors, and we're responsible community members. As responsible homeowners, we want to establish 10 feet of dispensable space between the tree and our house. That's what the fire department requires, and they don't make an exemption for oaks. It's for all trees. We currently spend about $1,000 a year trimming the tree. And we do that because we're trying to keep it away from the house. And even with that, we cannot find an arborist who will trim it back to 10 feet away from the house. Because what they tell us is that's not in the best interest of the tree. So the tree has branches. Our garage and our house are attached, so anything that's hanging over the garage is hanging right over the office as well. And having that tree so close dramatically increases our chance of having a bad outcome in a fire. And we are in Mission Canyon, which is a very high fire area, because above Mission Canyon in the hills has not burned in any of the past fires. As responsible neighbors, we want to replace the tree because although the tree is classified as fire resistant, that doesn't really mean it's not going to burn. As we understand it, what fire resistant means is should the tree burn, there's a better than average chance that the tree can regrow if part of the trunk remains. But if we look around at what's happened in recent fires, oak trees burn. They spread sparks. Our tree, as you guys have seen, those of you who visited our house, those of you who've seen the pictures, it has a huge canopy. And if it catches fire, it could very easily spread to a neighbor's house. On top of that, this current 7 years of drought, 2 years of torrential rain, 1 year of drought cycle that we're in the middle of, is exactly what causes trees like ours with these weird deep V's and multiple connections to fail. The arborists who cut our tree have told us the worst thing that can happen is this rapid drying out, rapid expansion, rapid drying out to make branches fall off. And currently, people park under our tree, kids play under that tree all the time. And if a branch falls off, somebody's going to get hurt, a car is going to get destroyed, a lot of bad things could happen. As responsible community members, we're not asking to take out the tree and cover the front yard with cement and paint it green. We have a ton of trees far enough away from our house in the backyard, and we want to put an appropriately sized tree in that place in the front yard, a tree that won't get into defensible space. We believe that actions, and we were raised to believe that actions have consequences and that people have to be accountable for the consequences of their actions. And right now, we're frustrated because we're trying to do the right thing, and we're feeling like the commission, the city, can take an action where we have to live with all of the consequences and all of the risk. I mean, if our house burns down because that tree catches fire because it catches a spark during the next wildfire, can we come back to you guys and say, hey, help us rebuild? If the fire spreads to the neighbors, can we count on you guys to help us defend the lawsuit? We would really like to be able to replace that tree with an appropriate tree, and we think it's fair and respectful and accountable to allow us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And that is it for speaker slips. I assume there's nobody online. Just do a quick check.
There are no hands raised.
Great, thank you. All right, open it up for discussion and perhaps additional questions if there are any. I guess this is the first I've heard of arborists refusing to trim a tree. Is that something that is normal? I mean, is that, and I guess there weren't any arborist reports in the documentation, so obviously, so there's no way to document that, but.
Chair McGill, Commissioners, I think if I understood the applicant correctly, it sounds like they've just discussed maybe doing like heavier reduction to get some clearance from the garage. And I think a good arborist might say that that's not the greatest for the tree, you know, just in terms of loss of, you know, total leaf surface area, and maybe the cuts were big. So maybe that's where it's coming from. It's really tough to say. I think that it's been a long time since I was out there. I think that there's, you know, you could probably do that without having, it wouldn't, you know, it's certainly not going to kill the tree. But it's probably just somebody being respectful for, you know, the oak and just trying to preserve the overall health of the tree, I guess.
Okay, thanks. Vice Chair Clark.
To me, it seems, although there were several reasons listed that the applicants want to remove the tree, basically, I feel like from the applicant's discussion, it's boiling down to feeling at threat from wildfire, which is very, very understandable given what our state is going through. And I've mentioned before that I was hoping we could have a workshop with fire personnel and wildlife fire people, just because these are kind of new circumstances for us. The amount of applicants we have talking about fire, being afraid of fire, the insurance changes, and not wanting to set precedent without having data is a really difficult thing for me. That's just what's going through my head.
Chair McGill and commissioners, we have internally discussed the need to have a joint meeting between the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Street Tree Advisory Committee. That would also include representatives from the fire department. You know, first of all, to talk about, and we have a number of new commissioners that are just learning our tree preservation ordinances, and it takes time to understand why these rules exist, what the basis of the rules, and then to discuss to what extent should there be amendments, and is it a municipal code amendment, is it a policy amendment, and the different community considerations that exist today versus what might have existed 10 years ago. And community wildfire is clearly at top of mind for everyone. You know, it's a tough question that we're trying to answer. I can tell you that our forestry staff do work with fire staff on a regular basis, and as you know, we have our wildfire resiliency project, which is addressing open spaces throughout the city. So we're very keenly aware of looking at how we change our land management practices as a public agency, and then obviously the extent to which that also can support what private landowners do. Depending on which way the commission goes, nothing would preclude further consideration of a tree removal at another date. The applicant's concerns, obviously, is going to have those concerns. They are adjacent to the Mission Canyon neighborhood, which is in unincorporated county, which is, I believe, entirely considered high fire hazard. They're just outside the cities, but it is in that area where there is concern. We have, you know, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of trees in our community. So part of it is really determining what's the approach we should take long-term to addressing vegetation management as a whole, and how we might revise that given the change in climate and considerations that we have regarding the changing climate.
Yeah, it's a tough one, actually. And because it's, if you're thinking about it, the oaks are the kind of trees that you want in this climate. I mean, they're resilient, they're native. Can you comment further, Ms. Mitchell, right? Did I get that right? Thank you. Sorry about that. Commented about fire resistance, meaning that the tree lives as opposed to not catching fire. Can you comment on that? I didn't articulate that very well, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Chair McGill, Commissioners, it's not really like in arboricultural terms, so I'm not really going to get too deep into that, and I don't want to say something,
Okay.
inaccurate or contrary to what the applicant's understanding of what that term is. But I do think, and I'm just saying, I had a call with fire prevention staff, 2 days ago. We're talking about how the code applies to things. And I think just in short, and this is not to be insensitive to the applicants or people that have concerns, but if a tree is green and not dead, there's basically nothing that they do. And that exists in high fire hazard zones and also in areas that aren't there. So just to maybe provide a little bit of clarity, the fire department would not say that this is a fire hazard. We've seen, not one time have we ever been directed by the fire department to have a tree removed. That's also in the ordinance. That applies, to even street trees and also setback trees, and would satisfy one of the exemptions. So just to try to provide some clarity, I think that when the fire prevention staff look at a situation like this, maybe there's some pruning that needs done for clearance from the structure, but they're not going to support the removal of a tree that's in this condition on any property, even if it's within a high fire hazard zone.
Okay, thanks very much. With that, I don't have any further speakers or requests, so I'm prepared to entertain a motion. Commissioner Aldana.
Okay, so an oak versus the magnolia in a fire. I mean, is it beneficial to have a magnolia rather than an oak?
Chair McGill, Commissioners, I think, or Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, sorry, I think again, we're getting into really subjective territory. The reality is that if either of those trees were there and the tree burned significantly, the whole neighborhood's probably on fire, because you're looking at a conflagration rather than a wildfire. So it's there, and that's something that we have been in discussion. We can provide some clarity, but there's a big difference between a wildfire and what they call a structure-to-structure fire, which is a conflagration, I think is the term. And that, in almost all cases, is what is really problematic in terms of loss of structure. So even the pine trees that we looked at on last month from El Monte, those are way more flammable, and there's consensus with conifers in terms of dry material. The fire prevention staff said if those trees ignited, they burn for about 5 minutes, if that. And the chances are they're on fire from the structure. Those are from conversations directly with fire prevention staff. So I think both trees probably have a very high fire resistance. And if you're looking at total tree loss or the whole tree burning, the neighborhood's in far worse shape than just the tree.
Thank you. That's helpful, actually very helpful. All right, is anybody prepared to make a motion? Vice Chair Clark.
I'm prepared to make a motion to agree with the Street Tree Advisory Committee decision to deny the removal of the oak at 408 Los Robles.
I'm prepared to second, but I would like to make it without prejudice. And the reason I'm saying that, because I know I'm not one to throw the without prejudice into things, but it's such an evolving conversation around private property trees and fire and insurance, that I think we ought to at least give scope for coming back as that conversation evolves.
And I'll amend my motion to include without prejudice.
Okay. And so we have a motion and a second. Unless there's any further comment or questions, we'll go to a vote. I see Commissioner Nielsen.
Thank you, Chair Miguel. Can you please just, we heard a minute ago how, from the staff, that an owner can bring back a tree to the committee at any point that they're willing to. So does without prejudice in this context just reinforce that that's an opportunity for them? Is that all where the motion was meant to include?
Yeah, unless you want to give the technical, what it without prejudice is, that's basically what that does. It clears the
Chair
decks.
McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, commissioners in general, yes, that does leave the door open. I can tell you that we are always available to reach back out to applicants. And in a situation like this, they would not pay a new application fee, for example. And it might be that there's a way that we come up with, whatever the next steps are, whatever they may be, that we are able to come to some approach with landowners that have specific tree issues that then may end up having the ability to remove their tree.
Thank you, Director Joe.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there is no further discussion, Vice Chair Clark, and then we're going to go to a vote.
I just did want to make sure that the applicants knew how much we respect their opinion and their wishes, and that we're just trying to make decisions that benefit you as a resident to be able to live in a city that has an urban forest. And we are deeply concerned with precedent and taking out a tree that doesn't need to be taken out, and then having that be a domino effect and having our city denuded. So it's not that we're dismissing your concerns at all. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, our hearts are with you and we're all trying to make good decisions.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, I will go to a vote. Where are we? Okay, thank you. Passes now. I'm going to read the appeal language. All right, so, and bear with me for a second, there's lots of numbers. Any action of the Parks and Recreation Commission made pursuant to Santa Barbara Municipal Code, Chapter 1520, tree planting and maintenance, or 1524, preservation of trees may be appealed to the City Council within 10 days pursuant to 13050 of the Municipal Code. So basically, you can appeal this decision to City Council. They have the last word, but you need to do so within 10 days. Again, thank you. All right, and this takes us to 2301 Wellington.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove redwood located within the front setback of the property at 2301 Wellington Avenue. The applicant was requesting removal of the tree also for fire concerns, referencing, you know, the elevated concerns after the two most recent wildfires down, or fires down in Southern California. We had the opportunity to talk to the applicant at the meeting, and then we met him at home during the site visit, looked at the tree. If you were able to do a site visit as well, it was a pretty exemplary specimen of redwood, quite large, quite old, and still in really good health, which is very difficult to find around the area. In conversations directly with the applicant, I think we took a very similar approach that we've been taking, and this is an isolated tree in an area where there's really no other trees around, in a part of town that's, you know, not in a high fire hazard zone, and of extremely low risk, even though it is relatively close to the structure. The applicant actually was pretty relieved with the conversation and seemed quite pleased that it wasn't of direct concern. And, you know, he was just very happy with the conversation, so it went really well. And then, you know, naturally after review, the committee made a recommendation to deny the application, which the applicant was actually okay with as well.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Aldana.
Does the owner live there, or is this a rental?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, yeah, the owner, he's lived there for quite a long time.
Okay, but then he says it's going to be dropped. I mean, his insurance is going to be dropped.
That was not part of the discussion. I think maybe general concerns, you know, we're seeing that stated a lot too, but sometimes it's more of a statement and it's not actually in the process of happening.
Yeah, that was my question too. It's a little unclear from the application, but it didn't seem like it came up as part of your discussion, but it was a little unclear whether it had actually been dropped or was concerned about being dropped.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, not at all.
Okay.
So I talked to the applicant before the meeting, during the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting and the site visit. There was no discussion of him not being currently insured.
Okay, great, thanks. Any additional questions? All right, I do not have a speaker slip. Do we have anybody online?
We do have someone online, but their hand is not raised.
Okay. Raise now or forever hold your peace. With that, I'm prepared to entertain either discussion or a motion. Commissioner Nielsen, then Price.
I will move to accept the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation and deny the request for removal.
Commissioner Price?
I'll second.
And I would like to go ahead and make it without prejudice just because of the evolving conversation, which I know that that's not maybe necessary in this instance, but yeah,
I'm willing to accept that amendment if that's.
yeah. That's what I was going to suggest.
I was thinking maybe with, due to the insurance issue.
We may be saying the same thing.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
Yeah. That you're suggesting that they'd be able to bring it back if something changes. Yes, we're saying the same thing. Okay, thank you. All right, with that, if there's no other discussion, let's go to a vote. It's hot in here. All right, motion passes, and I will not repeat the appeal language. I don't think it's necessary. And then we go to our master plan.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review, I'll talk about, there's actually two of them due to the way we agendized it. It'll be like two separate actions, but we're kind of talking about sort of one continuous strip of street or parkway there. It surrounds the Peabody Charter School, and forestry staff's been working with the school to create like a Arbor Day opportunity in the next couple weeks to plant trees around the school campus, which is pretty denuded and lost a lot of trees over the last several years. And the current designation for these streets it was the purple leaf plum, which is a pretty short-lived, very like climate adapted species to the area anymore. So staff went back to the committee to discuss options that made more practical sense for planting in these narrow parkway strips around part of the school. It's also worth mentioning that the jacaranda, it was a designation previously for both of these streets. During discussion, the jacaranda was determined to warrant retention because there exists other planting opportunities. If you know the San Roque area, there's almost no sidewalks anywhere, but there does exist a lot of street trees, and even though you can't see it, there's invisible parkway. So, at some point in time, staff may engage the neighborhood and try to repopulate with street trees. And in that case, the jacaranda, a larger shade tree, would make a lot more practical sense. And then in reviewing smaller trees that would work well around the school, the committee ultimately recommended the Marina madrone and also the crepe myrtle. So just kind of building upon like the continued theme of diversity, both of these trees do well in small spaces and provide a lot of like visual interests and some educational opportunities for the kiddos as well, looking at the different flowers and fruit type, and now you have a deciduous tree too that you can kind of talk about all those natural cycles. And it is part of like the kindergarten, first grade curriculum, so it's kind of neat. And so after review, they made a recommendation, the Street Tree Advisory Committee made a recommendation to recommend the use of crepe myrtle, jacaranda, and marina madrone for all of Vista de la Cumbre.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Slack? Commissioner Ramsey?
Yes, just because it's close to education, do these drop any fruit or nuts that kids may pick up and just shove in their mouth because they're in kindergarten?
And Chair McGill, Commissioner Ramsey, the arbutus does produce a fruit. It is edible and safe. It tastes really poor, I guess, from what I've heard. I've not had any, but the other trees are good. So everything we're planting around there is pretty safe.
Some people like arbutus fruit.
Yeah, this one's pretty good. Yeah, but there's the European arbutus unido, and that in Latin unido means like essentially he who eats only one, because they're terrible. Yeah.
But the birds really like them, so that's another part of education. All right, any other questions? All right, well, if there are no questions, I assume there's nobody raised hands? Yeah? No?
Chair McGill, there's no reason.
Okay, I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the change in designation Vista de la Cumbre to jacaranda, crepe myrtle, and marina madrone. And Vice Chair Clark?
I shall second that.
All right. No further discussion. We will go to a vote. All right, and then I think we're going to rinse and repeat.
Chair McGill, Commissioners, that's correct. So the other section of that continuous street is Calle Negra, and the same conversation applies to this. So the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommended the use of crepe myrtle, jacaranda, and the marina madrone for all of Calle Negra.
Okay. So unless somebody stops me, I'm going to assume that we can go straight to a motion and a vote. Somebody.
Motion to accept, sorry.
Okay. And Commissioner Aldana? All right.
I'll second.
All right. With assuming no further discussion, let's go to a vote. All right, and motion passes, and that takes us to our last, which is State Street.
And Chair McGill and Commissioners, the last Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is a request it's to modify the designation for the 26 and 2700 blocks of State Street. So this was kind of an interesting, neat one. We had the opportunity with transportation. We've been trying to do like infill tree wells as often as we can. We had just completed a fun project on the opposite side of McKenzie Park in the 3100 block of State Street, where we started incorporating shade trees amongst the king palms there. And sort of as an extension of that street repair project, they were in the 26 and 2700 blocks, and we had the opportunity to carve out several 3-foot by 6-foot tree wells, and basically one block there was no street trees, so it was a really great infill opportunity. There was some inquiries from the public, like why were these tree wells here, and they were curious about what we were planning on planting. And so the original designation from the original adoption of the street tree designation list was Coast Live Oak, which is continuous essentially from Constance all the way to Mission. So I think in making that document, it just made logical sense to continue that species throughout. There was some concerns about it, a lot of interest from the neighboring apartment complex, so they actually requested that we take a second look at it and look at other options that may make good sense for use within these two blocks. So We had a really good conversation. This actually took 2 meetings. So we sort of introduced it and talked about it. We did a site visit, and then the committee provided some suggestions. And then we came back the second meeting and kind of did a deep dive on what made good sense and had some good public concepts about trying to find some things with some visual interests and, you know, function well in the small space or smaller spaces. And, you know, for no particular reason, we ended up with crepe myrtle and Marina madrone again, which is pretty funny because it's 3 in a row. But still really good selections for those tree wells. It gives us some diversity. Both of these trees are stuff that we don't have a ton of in terms of total tree count, so we're not really, you know, getting over reliant on any particular species. There were a couple committee members that still felt strongly about retention of the coast live oak designation, but also adding in the additional species. And so after review, the committee made a recommendation to recommend the use of coast live oak, crepe myrtle, and Marina madrone for the 26 and 2700 blocks of State Street.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Slack? I see people pushing buttons, but nothing's happening. I think it was Commissioner Nielsen followed by Commissioner Price. I'm not showing the. Yeah, it's not popping up.
Mr. Slack, can you please comment? And we see a picture of a crepe myrtle here, and is that a relatively juvenile or adult one? How do these grow? And what I'm really getting at is how do we need to maintain them to provide for like the 80-inch clearance on a sidewalk and a tree well, and as these come to life?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, that's a great question. I would say this photo is pretty juvenile. So the ones that we're actually using now are kind of hybrids, and they have like a higher resistance to powdery mildew. They can get about 25 to 30 feet, so they're small trees. But they're grown in the nursery as like what we would call standards. So they're single stem trees, even when we plant them. And so that makes care pretty easily. So it's just normal routine structural pruning. But if you're familiar with crepe myrtle, you know, especially in the southeast, you see these sort of like multi-stem kind of bushy things. And they can do that too, but they're grown specifically to look like this. And then as the tree develops, we're just kind of inching up over time as the tree matures to make sure that we get the desired clearance.
Thank you, Mr. Slack.
There it goes. Okay, great. Commissioner Price, then Commissioner Aldana.
Thank you. It says here that there's we could either consider a new or modified designation. Which one of those would give your team the most leeway in being able to consider trees for this area?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Price, I think what we're looking at, which is like a modified designation, so it was just sort of our phrasing. So the new designation would have just done away with the coast live oak, whereas modifying it just essentially like retains it. So I think in this instance, it gives staff a lot of like tools in the toolbox to go out there and make good decisions about which tree species should go where, and, you know, being cognizant of all the other infrastructure challenges that street trees are up against.
And Commissioner Aldana.
Yes, regarding the petition, and the 25 signed signatures, was that before the second meeting or after?
And Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, that was shortly after the tree wells were cut. But I think we, you know, through the public process, really kind of hit on, you know, the sweet spot where we're looking at, you know, the needs of the community, meaning the people that live right immediately adjacent, as well as like the needs of the greater community and trying to reduce heat island effect and just the overall, you know, charge of the urban forest management plan. So I think it went really well. We had a lot of public participation in both of those meetings, and I think that the residents there that were, you know, pretty interested in the happenings out there were pretty pleased with the process.
The size of the tree, if it passes, what, 15 gallon or?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana, yeah, we typically would plant a 15 gallon in that location, yeah.
Okay, because I've noticed on State Street, right there by McKinley. I know we had a bad windstorm, but it seems like those stakes are just not quite, maybe we need a little more, something more heavy duty. Just my opinion for what that's worth.
You're going to answer, are you going to just note?
Yeah, Chair McGill, Commissioner Aldana. Yeah, those trees in particular it's a pretty unique type of eucalyptus, and they were very tall. So they grow quick. So those are just particularly challenging. We kind of knew what we were getting into when we installed those, but it was like a necessary challenge from staff's perspective. Most 15s are quite small. You know, you're talking like 6 feet or under, so the stakes usually are more than adequate. But we planted them right before the windstorm on Christmas Eve, and it's been a tough time for them, but I think they're going to pull through.
It's just nice to see the young trees grow straight. Yeah.
I mean, as you fill those tree wells, it was pretty obvious that where the real energy was not wanting the coast live oaks in those tree wells. So when you actually come to the decision process of which of the 3 trees go in there, how will that work?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, I feel pretty confident that there will be 9 crepe myrtles planted on that street in continuous pattern.
That'll be pretty. All right, I think it's time for a motion, unless anybody has any further discussion or questions. Well, I guess in this instance, there could be a speaker. There's nothing here. Is there anybody online?
No, Chair McGill, the person who's online is one of the staff members, and he's
Okay,
here.
okay, great. And with that case, is anybody would care to make a motion? If not, I will. I will go ahead and move that we accept the Street Tree Committee recommendation to modify the designation for the 2700 block of State Street to include crepe myrtles and marina madrones, as well as the coast live oaks. Commissioner Aldana?
And I will second.
Okay, and assuming no further discussion, why don't we go ahead and vote? And that's that. All right, that takes us out for trees this month. Thank you very much. See you next month. Are we ready to move on? Okay.
Chair McGill, Commissioners, this is the challenge when I have to give a presentation, as you experienced last month, of how to get the mouse to work even though it's over there. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So I'll probably ask Ms. Carlson to come over and set it up when we get to item 8. But first of all, your director's report talks about 2 things related to activities of the department. Believe me, there's more than 2, but sometimes we just try to pick some things that are of interest. The first has to do with the Santa Barbara Golf Club. We are entering spring, even though it still sometimes feels like winter, and today it feels like summer. But every year we have what's called a golf club fitting season, and this is an opportunity for Titleist, which we use Titleist golf clubs in our loaner clubs that we have, so people get the opportunity to experience A, golfing without having to buy golf clubs, and B, whether they are a right-handed or left-handed, and then also whether they want to buy that brand if they become a serious golfer. So we have a fitting opportunity in the middle of March, and then of course there's always perks in terms of cost and shipping and that kind of thing. Courseco, our golf management company, manages this. We have a pro shop at the golf course, and so it's a great way for people to sort of get a handle on what they might want without going out and spending a fairly decent amount of funds to buy golf course. We also have Callaway coming on April 5th, and then TaylorMade and Ping Fittings later in the spring. So there's a big host of that. We have 2 events. Again, it is spring. The annual Masters event is very golf related. and the egg hunt is not golf-related. You might wonder, why do we have an egg hunt at the golf course? Our management agreement with Corsco includes offering community events at the golf course that are not golf-related. They do movies in the summertime. They have kindly taken on the department's annual egg hunt. Once upon a time, we were one of the few games in town that did egg hunts, and Chase Palm Park was one location where we did it, and then also Bonnet Park. There are a myriad of egg hunts throughout the community. This one is extremely popular, and if I have my numbers correct, we had like 400 kids last year. So part of it is a bit of a challenge logistically, because although we have a large parking lot, things get a little crazy, but it is very much loved, and thanks to Corsco for wanting to offer that. And then you had a great presentation from a youth council member last month about the Youth Speak Out and a number of their activities. They recently received a $2,000 grant, a Youth Making Change grant from the Fund for Santa Barbara. They've been very successful year over year getting funding to support their Speak Out events. So in this case, they were awarded again. They are planning their 2005 Speak Out event, focusing on topics such as environmentally conscious practices, creating safe public spaces for teens, mental health resources for teens, and inclusiveness. They have a sign-up, and it's open for students in grades 7 through 12. So it's all student-led, student-focused, and then they give everybody lunch, which is always a nice perk. And then they also have local leaders come in and do, this year they're doing a Q&A. They've done breakout sessions and work groups in prior years. And it's a great event. And it's hosted this year at the Louise Lowry Davis Center, which you know we recently reopened after many years being closed before the renovation. So I expect that at your next meeting, you will get a report out from the Youth Speak Out event. That concludes just a few brief updates on things that are happening in Parks and Recreation. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Any idea how many have signed up for the Speak Out yet?
Chair McGill, commissioners, no, that's not something we monitor. That's a youth council. Yeah. That's their avenue. That's what they do. They work closely with Nicole Morgan, who is the staff person assigned to be their liaison.
Yeah. They'll tell us next month.
I anticipate that it will be very well attended.
Yeah.
It always is.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much. It's always good to get this report every month, because it's always good stuff. All right, that takes us to the committee liaison reports. And for those of you who are new, I'm sure when you talked to Director Zachary, when you joined the commission, she explained the various committees and subcommittees that we like to get a liaison into each committee, at least one, and some benefit from two, just depending on the meeting schedules. The first, make sure we have two vacancies, so we have arts and crafts and golf that we need to get somebody into. Youth council meets twice a month, so getting somebody else in there probably wouldn't go amiss. And then we also entertain if there's anybody on the commission that wants to make a change. I know that Vice Chair Clark would not want to make a change. I've only been told 4 or 5 times this year.
In case you forgot.
In case I forgot. And I guess there's one thing, I'm actually the primary on IPM.
Yeah, correct.
I think we changed it last year or the year before, I can't remember, but I'm the primary for IPM. Yeah. And so I would say, if there's anybody who's currently sitting on a committee that wants a change, why don't we start with that now? Because
I would think arts and crafts.
you would like to do arts and crafts?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that mean you want to come off of the neighborhood council? Okay. Okay, so, the youth council, I mean, sorry. All right, and so that leaves, now we definitely need to get somebody on youth council, and golf. Is there any of our new commissioners that would be willing to take on the youth council? I'm not saying you have to go twice a month, but it's to be there for Leo's. Commissioner Nielsen?
I'm definitely happy to give it a best effort on the twice-a-month schedule, knowing that I'm likely to miss quite a few and
Ye-
put my name down and contribute.
Yep, I mean, that'd be great. That's why if we can get two, that's great. If not, you do what you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're there, they can reach out to you too if they need somebody to liaise with. So it's not necessarily, I mean, none of us make all the meetings. Just to be clear on that, or very few of us do. Okay, got that. And Commissioner Price, is there anything that is singing out to you?
I guess since I do have a degree in hospitality, I should probably throw my name in the hat for the golf course committee.
All right. So I'm going to recapitulate here. We've got Commissioner Lesnar Buxton taking on arts and crafts. Commissioner Aldana, you still good with Greeks?
Yes, because
Okay.
my schedule has changed, so it'll work out now.
Okay, great. The De La Guerra Plaza Revitalization Arts and Cultures, actually, what I don't know what it's called, many words, subcommittee. That has actually started meeting again, and I'm happy to stay with that. We've got Commissioner Price for golf. I'm on IPM along with Vice Chair Clark. Happy to stay with Park. And I know better than to touch street trees. And then we've got Commissioner Nielsen on Youth Council. And Commissioner Aldana.
Yes, for the youth council, is it okay to be an alternate?
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think that will be gratefully accepted.
Okay, very good.
All right. That was easy. I think it's a wrap. Directors,
Excuse me, Chair McGill and Commissioners, it is possible to have an alternate. The goal of you attending these meetings, it gives you an opportunity to learn more about what these committees are doing. You're not there to make decisions or have to say anything. It gives you an opportunity to listen and then bring that information back to the commission. It's something, if you look at the city council list of liaisons, it's pretty long because we have so many committees and commissions, and we have Councilmember Santa Maria here because she is your liaison to the Parks and Recreation Commission. So keeping that in mind, if there is an interest at some point to join, just know that we can't have a quorum of the commission and that there's no real active engagement or decision-making that you have.
yeah. I mean, the only one would be, I know Park, we can have two members, and those are actually active board members, so that's different than the liaise.
Yeah, and Chair McGill and Commissioners, we're in the process at the Park Foundation of coming up with a sort of our goal list for expanding the board, and be happy to bring that back to the commission with an opportunity to see if there's a good fit with another commissioner.
Yeah, I think that'd be the way to take it.
At a later date, doesn't have to happen tonight.
Yeah, I think that's the way to take it. And then Commissioner Nielsen.
Director Zachary, does the Integrated Pest Management quarterly meeting, has that happened on a historical day of the week, and we intend to continue that? Is there a reason for the TBD there? Or what triggers a meeting wanting to be called?
I mean, I can answer that since I'm the one recently, it has tended to be on Thursday mornings, but that's not, it is a TBD, and I think it's driven as much as anything by actually the exemption requests coming in. Yeah. All right. So that then takes us to our two review items, the kind of year in review items, or years in review. So we will start with the 2024 review. Director Zachary?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, this was a request of Commissioner Clark. And for our new commissioners, every year you get a report from our advisory committees as to what they achieved or what their key issues were. So this is our first time sort of documenting actions and activities of the commission in your formal public meetings. We did it on a calendar year basis because that's what helped us sort of get our hands around it. I think one thing we tried to do, and I need to acknowledge that Ms. Carlson did a lot of the heavy lifting of pulling all of this together. So thanks to her, we have this staff report. It gives new commissioners a sense of the number of trees that were considered in the last year, and whether they were street trees, setback trees, or tree designations. We gave you the dates, the months that happened, if you want to go back and look on the city's website for more information about the findings, what the actual staff report addressed, and what the actions were of the commission. And then similarly, some examples, rather than going through this ad nauseum, sort of informational items of things that the commission received last year. Some of these projects and programs you will receive again this year in terms of an update. For example, the Chumash Cultural Project at Ambassador Park, we actually, as you'll hear in the next presentation, hope to have our next round of funding in place by June. And we'll be back doing more work on the design, and we'll be back to the commission to share our progress at some point in the year. And then similarly, anything related to recreation programs and services, we try to come forward on an annual basis and give you updates. We have a couple of areas that, it's been a while. We're actually going to bring golf forward sometime soon, because you haven't had a golf presentation on what happens at the golf course for some time. And then some of the other projects as it relates to capital, the Davis Center, Alice, we're kind of almost done those, although the Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden project construction, knock on wood, begins on March 10th. So we'll be able to go back and look at the results probably in May as part of a site visit. And then similarly, the Franceschi Reimagining Project, we hope to be able to bring that to you to sort of give you somewhat of a sneak peek before we submit for land development where we are in that design. There's quite a bit of information on our webpage that relates to a lot of the community outreach that we've done on that project and some of the conceptual plans. So we'll be back before you once our new project planner is on board, which we will have next month as well. So the idea is to give you a sense of these things, and of course we'll have budget in April. Coming up next month, we'll actually have two presentations that relate to parks and public spaces. One is the waterfront adaptation planning process that's just getting underway. So we'll have staff from Sustainability and Resilience do that presentation. And then also the City Council recently initiated an update to the city's open space element, which is part of our general plan. Community development is taking the lead on that. So you'll also get a sneak peek next month as to what that means as it relates to parks and recreation, mostly parks and open space. So if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but we hopefully gave you a way to go look for yourself on your own time or for things that you're most interested in.
Thanks. Commissioner Nielsen.
Director Zachary, does the report, or maybe you can comment if it's not in the report, on activity, recent activity, current activity on the department's staffing? Are there open positions? Is there appropriate unanticipated turnover? And how's the team doing on the whole to manage the scope of work?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Nielsen, we usually do that as part of our budget presentation because usually it relates to new positions or position requests. However, I'd be happy to come back before the commission and talk through sort of our org chart in more detail and where the staff are allocated. As part of budget, we show you by division the number of staff and the type of staff, so you get a sense of what's allocated where. And then also as part of budget, you know, we rely significantly in parks on contracted services in some cases. And then in recreation, we work very closely with a number of service providers. So we don't have lots of recreation staff running around doing summer camps. We only operate 2 summer camps, but we offer as many as 20 summer camps. So we'll be able to give you that information. It's usually best to show it as part of budget because it creates that connection.
Thank you.
I had just one quick question. It was just something that's jumped out at me, and unfortunately, Mr. Slack's not here. The city trees, 75 trees recommended for removal and only planting 13. That just, because normally we do at least a 1-for-1, so I was wondering what I'd forgotten, actually. You're looking at, I mean, it's something that we can take offline or there's. you see where I am?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, I'd have to go
Yeah.
back and look at that. I don't know off the top of my, off of my head what that relates to. A lot of the times when you're looking at, and maybe Ms. Carlson can answer this question, looking at city trees, it often has to do with streets.
Yeah.
And street improvement projects. But maybe, Ms. Carlson, you have a little more information?
I was wondering if it was La Cumbre, I think we took La Cumbre Plaza area that last year, and I was wondering if it was because of that.
Yes, if I may, Chair McGill, that was in relation to the De La Guerra Plaza project that we happened.
Okay.
Where there was the big there was a lot of removals, but we did preserve some.
Okay, got it, thanks. I knew it was something like that I just wasn't remembering right, because it was such a off balance, yeah, thanks. Okay, Commissioner Nielsen.
Director Zachary, in the same section at the bottom of the page, a ratio of 1.26 to 1 for removals to replacements. Do we have any historical context as to how that ratio is up or down or anything from prior years?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, no, we don't have that kind of data. I can say that there are times when a setback tree is approved for removal, and it partly has to do with the fact that the front yard is really, really tiny, and the tree is totally overgrown, may have been planted right next to the house. We see that in Santa Barbara, and therefore it really has outgrown its space, and there's no room for another setback tree. Sometimes there's a recommendation to plant a city street tree in lieu of a setback tree, but this would not necessarily capture that.
Thank you.
And Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yes, regarding the De La Guerra Plaza, could you just double check to see if it was 75? Because I tend to remember something like 47, so just at your convenience,
Okay,
and then shoot us an email,
and Commissioner Price.
Thank you. Director Zachary, you've mentioned site visits a couple times. Do you have any sort of idea when those would take place, during the day, during the week? Not specifically, but I'm just trying to get an idea of my own timing.
Sure. Chair McGill and Commissioners, we wait for the time change, for starters. We do try to schedule site visits within the work week, knowing that people have personal lives that they attend to on the weekends, with the idea that we either couple it with a very short commission meeting, so if we have tree items, we meet in here and then we adjourn and then go to a site visit, or we look to come up with a date that works for hopefully everyone, which may or may not be a Wednesday. If Wednesdays, since you already meet on a Wednesday, it makes sense, we try to do that. On occasion, we have scheduled a Saturday event where we've gone to multiple locations. And I think Commissioner Lesnar-Buxton, Chair McGill, and Commissioner Clark will remember when we went to a variety of places to look at a number of facilities that we were hoping to engage in improvements on. That's something we'll work closely with commissioners to figure out what makes sense for your schedules, and to try to also link it either to something you're about to see on your agenda or have recently seen on your agenda, or oftentimes if we're having a ribbon cutting or a groundbreaking, we'll just invite you to when it's scheduled and hope you can attend, and that could, actually it often depends on the city council's schedule and the mayor's schedule. So sometimes that is during the week at 11 a.m. on a Thursday, for example. And clearly there's no expectation on the part of staff that commissioners attend, although we love to have you if that's possible. Occasionally, not occasionally, it depends on what we're working on, but we often have community meetings on the weekends as well, and commissioners are notified of those meetings. You are not to attend as a commissioner because it's not a commission meeting, but you're welcome to attend just to listen and to hear about that. So you'll hear about those, and again, if you are able, that's something that we ask commissioners to let us know, because we need to know how many are going to show up and make sure we don't have any Brown Act violations when that happens. So hopefully that's enough. We'll start working on it fairly soon, but with the idea that hopefully we have at least a month of planning And similarly, I mentioned the work session with the Street Tree Advisory Committee. That's something that we would host. It probably would be at the end of a quote-unquote workday, weekday, with the idea that we would also potentially have it off-site. We don't always necessarily have to have a work session in council chamber.
Yeah, thanks. And we're actually getting, a less formal setting makes sense for those. All right, I think that's it. So shall we move on to our last item, which is the grants and donations review?
Excellent. Chair McGill, Commissioners, I managed to get it going all by myself. So we have in the past, well, let me step back and basically say, this department is very active in securing grants, primarily focused on our capital projects, but also for operating programs that we have, and often it's recreation programs, but also sometimes we get grants or gifts related to tree maintenance and other activities. Occasionally, we come to the commission requesting your approval, particularly for a community development block grant, because we need an actual third-party organization, and that sort of functions as a nonprofit to give approval for that. So what we did, and again, I want to acknowledge that Ms. Carlson went through a lot of data, compiling 8 years, and it wasn't that easy at times because staff have different ways of talking about what they're getting. So sometimes we have to go, that really wasn't a grant, that was really a cash donation, yada, yada, yada. So to the best of our knowledge, this is accurate, but it gives you a general sense of what the department has done recently. So we categorize these contributions in 4 different ways. One is cash. Somebody gives us a donation. It often goes through the Park Foundation. They write a check. Grants, they're usually from state, federal, but also nonprofit foundations. Non-cash donations are really in-kind services. And then we also count volunteer hours. And that's volunteer hours including yourselves, who volunteer to help support and guide the Parks and Recreation Department. So, as I mentioned, we also have the Parks and Recreation Community Foundation, for which Chair McGill serves as a board member. The Park Foundation was established in 1984. Over the years, it has played a significant role in assisting with securing grants and cash donations for a variety of department programs and projects. Some of the more major ones being the Cabrillo Pavilion renovation, more recently Plaza Del Mar, bandshell renovation, and then also on an ongoing basis, we have grants and donations that come for various recreation programs. With Summer Fun, which is our free summer drop-in program, we luckily have had the Wood Claysons Foundation generously provide a $37,000 grant every year to help support implementation of that program. And then we've also worked with other foundations like the Audacious Foundation that supported free swim lessons. And then we have funds that come in from Reef and Run. Anybody who's a Reef and Run participant, they also give a donation for the junior lifeguard program, and so on. The Bragg Foundation has been a huge supporter of the Chef Apprentice program. So when I go back to that, really what the Park Foundation also provides is a nonprofit entity for any entity or individual that wants a tax deduction for their gift. And we do an annual appeal. Staff also write grant proposals under the umbrella of the Park Foundation. And then we also have people that do designated donations. We've had bequests that have come through. For example, when a young man who was a golfer who passed away, his family listed the Park Foundation as a recipient, and so the funds that were received went into the Russ Morrison Jr. Golf program. Similarly, we've had situations where someone has lost their child. It was an avid skateboarder, and we established a free skate program, and grant funds are used to help kids that otherwise could not do a skate camp do skate camp. So sometimes people come to us and say, I want to do X, how do I do that? And our response is, well, one way to do it is designate your donation through the Park Foundation. And we want to align it with something we're doing or want to do rather than take on a new activity or a new responsibility, because we generally have plenty to do to begin with. So it's very successful. Chair McGill mentioned that we're working with the Park Foundation. I think our goal is 4 community events at the Plaza Del Mar band shell, and Park being generously willing to cover the cost if the performer needs payment, but also cover the department's costs, because we have costs in terms of what it takes for us to permit, staff, set up, breakdown, everything related to the event. So that's a really good opportunity for a partnership there too. Just to give you a sense of what we're looking at, the total is about $10 million and how it really breaks down. I think one of the things to notice in these numbers are some significant ones. So the $4.1 million is largely through state agencies. So we have significant grant funds through CAL FIRE for our wildfire resiliency project. We often get grants from the State Coastal Conservancy for our projects, and then also state parks for our projects. Similarly, when you look at the foundation amount, and it's a little bit smaller, a lot of that's focused on the Cabrillo Pavilion and or the Plaza Del Mar band shell. Community development block grants, over the years, the department has benefited tremendously in terms of millions of dollars for community development block grant funds that has supported the replacement of playgrounds. It's supported Eastside Neighborhood Park, and we apply for those every year, as you know. I should go back up and we'll get into more detail. And then when it says trust, that really refers to our endowment with the Douglas Family Preserve, which is held by Park, but then also Parma Park Trust, which we get a disbursement on an annual basis, and those funds are used solely for the maintenance and improvement of Parma Park.
Are you willing to take questions now? or
I
would
can
you
take
like-
questions now, or we can go through the presentation, however you wish, Chair McGill.
Is this one that would help now, or you?
Is this chart, this pie graph here, what timeline is this over? Is this the last fiscal year, or is this over the whole duration of?
No, this is over the timeline for your report, which is 2017 to 2024.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so, and then by division, so we also separate it by division, so you can see when you talk about administration, these are administrative staff, which includes myself, the assistant director, but also our project staff. And then sometimes the funds that are fundraised, even though the implementation is by another one, it's the administration division that's gone out and sought these funds. So we have almost $9 million that have come in for various projects and programs. A big ticket item in there is Dwight Murphy, but then these other ones, as they add up, total that amount, and they could be related to CDBG grant funds, like the bandstand grant that we had, Plaza Veracruz, we had a grant, and then Eastside Neighborhood Park and the Louise Lowry Davis Center. The cash amounts, those also come from sometimes foundations, and it's counted as cash because there's no strings attached, shall we say, or just a straight up donation, a private individual. We had, for example, a private individual gift, I think it was $5,000 for the renovation of the Oak Park dance floor, and he did it in memory of his friend, and he just chose to do it when he read about it in the news, and that's all he wanted to do. So those examples. And then volunteer hours, that has to do with this commission, but also the Park Foundation is counted in our volunteer hours. Under golf, looks kind of small, but golf is the type of program, it's an enterprise fund. All of its revenues are generated on the golf course, and all the revenues stay with the golf course. The biggest opportunity for cash donations come from the Russ Morrison Junior Golf Fund. It was established many, many years ago in memory of Russ Morrison. These funds are used primarily to support scholarships for graduating seniors that are going on to play golf in college. And so Park Foundation distributes grant funds to the Scholarship Foundation, And the Scholarship Foundation does the heavy lifting of deciding who is the lucky recipient. So we're not in the business of deciding who gets it, but we rely on the Scholarship Foundation because that is their strength, and they do fantastic work. Volunteer hours are related to the Gulf Advisory Committee. Parks Division, smaller amount from grants. As you can imagine, it's an operating division versus a capital projects division. So the Parma Park Maintenance Trust funds that we've gotten in over the last, since 2017 are significant. A good amount of those funds support annual maintenance, but also recently the Sustainable Trail Plan that we implemented. So all the planning costs to come up with the design, to do the research, to hire the technical studies, and then the actual implementation. The Parma Park Trust provided the bulk of all of that, pretty much the bulk of that financing. We work with two trustees on an annual basis to develop a work program and have them approve that work program, and that's when they approve the dispersal of funds. When it comes to something like this, and you sort of ask, like, where's this money held? Like, does it just sit in this sort of city general fund? It's held in a miscellaneous grants fund. So it's a fund that's just for cash donations, grants. So it rolls over year after year. It's not something if you don't use it, you lose it, which is what our general fund operating is about, or it gets placed in a capital account. So we can always guarantee that any funds that come into the city that aren't city funds, that are intended for a very specific purpose, are protected in that fund. They won't get dispersed for another purpose. When we look at our cash, the Douglas Family Preserve counts from the Park Foundation holding the endowment, and Park recently approved funds that have supported our tree maintenance, and then also will be supporting some trail improvements that we're working on. In-kind donations has to do with trees, so we work with Santa Barbara Beautiful, and although they don't give us money, when we're planting trees, they buy the trees, and so they take care of that cost. So it's not like we have to deal with the financing. We just have the list and they pay for it. And then we also worked with a foundation. If you've noticed in a couple of our parks, we've got water bottle filling stations that came from a nonprofit that really wanted to support that type of enhancement to our park, in our park setting. And then volunteer hours, I mean, the biggest with the volunteer hours when it comes to parks has to do with, as you can see, the Rose Garden pruning event. We also have volunteers that work year-round. And then trail maintenance and trail maintenance events. The Parks Division also recently built up the volunteer program for the Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden. So we have monthly volunteer events and volunteers that show up to help maintain that park. And then in recreation, similarly, although the grants amount is a little bit smaller because they're more program related, and cash comes with cash coming in and supporting very specific projects and initiatives. We've got a lot of in-kind support, and that has to do with, free meals that have to do with summer fun and our other in-kind support. And then volunteer hours looks like a lot, and I have this amazing list, which is impossible for me to read in the small font. But we've got volunteers, we've got junior counselors that volunteer, we've got seniors that volunteer, we have people that volunteer every week for our food distribution programs. So we partner with the food bank and do food distribution at 3 sites. And so we rely on volunteers to help, basically put together the packages for the people that line up for their free food. And then we also have, trying to think of what my other ones are, events that we have in our park system. And then pending grant applications, just to give you a sneak peek of where we're going. As commissioners who were here in December know, we recently submitted 2 grant applications, one to renovate the community building at Plaza Veracruz, and then also to do a little rehabilitation of the last section of the West Side Center parking lot, which is sorely in need of that. Community development block grants are through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Given the new administration, it's unclear whether those funds will actually come forward. However, we're hopeful, and the Human Services Committee, which is a separate committee of the city, does the evaluation of those grant proposals, and if they're recommended for funding, it goes to council in the March meeting. Again, whether the money will exist is unknown. If we do receive the funds, if that's what it turns out, generally those funds are available in October after the application, and the projects need to be implemented by April. So this time next year, like the project we have at Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden, would technically be under construction. Also, we have, as I mentioned, the CAL FIRE grant for wildfire resilience. We started with a $500,000 grant, which we secured in collaboration with the fire department. We recently submitted an application to augment that work to close to $1 million. It's been approved by the State Coastal Conservancy Board. We don't have the final documents in the work plan, but we'll be taking that to council in April to award, or maybe late March. And so those funds we'll be able to spend over the next number of years to do more wildfire resiliency project work in our open spaces, but also do restoration. So part of that project is not only to deal with addressing fire risk, but also planting vegetation that's more fire resilient, and trees and planting that's more fire resilient. So over the course of many years, the amount of money and time the city has to spend cutting back trees and vegetation that we probably need to replace over time, we will eventually have to do less of that. I mentioned the Chumash Cultural Project at Ambassador Park. We had a $50,000 grant a few years ago to do the conceptual plan. The Coastal Conservancy Board will be considering the next phase, which is preliminary design, and project entitlements for $240,000 at their April meeting. So we may have that in place by June, and that'll take us through the next phase. And then lastly, this is another federally funded program, and the applications are due next month. We're still working through the application process. So it says TBD because we're not quite sure how much we're going to ask for. But Commissioner Aldana will be happy to know that Ortega Park would be the project we would be looking for, because it's the only one that qualifies. So one of the things when we're looking at granting sources is determine, do we have a project that qualifies? Like, what are their requirements, and do we actually have a project? And if we have a project, is it far enough along in the design planning phase that we're actually eligible to apply for those grant funds? So when it comes to community development block grants, it's very narrowly defined. It has to do with census data and low-income neighborhoods. And so we have to make sure that the park that we're focusing on actually is in a neighborhood that qualifies for those grant funds. We can't just apply for any park anywhere with CDBG. State Coastal Conservancy, they're very much interested in open space and coastal preservation. We've had many, many grants from them over the years. So we have a great relationship with them. And then again, the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Program is very narrowly defined. We have one project that qualifies based on where it's located. So that's what we're working on, and I have lots more. You have a lot in your staff report. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a lot of work goes into sourcing the money, managing the money. I mean, I'm always amazed at what it takes to get, how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into getting those resources. And then I'm even more amazed at how much you're able to stretch them every year and how much you can achieve with relatively small amounts of money. All right. Oh, God, I can't remember. First must be this one. Thank you. Okay. It's going to be Commissioners Nielsen, Ramsey, Price, Aldana.
Director Zachary, can you give us any examples or discuss about contributions from the business community, specifically maybe the arborists, landscapers, the people who do painting, concrete, striping work, and how they can engage and donate to your department, how they have in the past, how you like to see them in the future?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, that's a great question. We have in the past had private firms want to donate labor to help us. For example, the Mackenzie off-leash dog park that we were building. the challenge we have with the public purchasing code and the fact that every city project has to pay prevailing wage. In order for an employer to donate their employees' time, they'd actually have to pay their employees to do the work. Things have changed over the years, and so it's really challenging for us to even navigate how that might happen. That said, we have had in the past, for example, a paint distribution company donate paint. And that paint was then used by volunteers to paint the skate park, for example. So if it's stuff, it's easier. But if it's labor, they actually have to demonstrate that they're paying their employees. They can't force their employees to volunteer. And then there's obviously, back in the day, when Kids World was built, back in the early 90s, and there was a volunteer, we can't do that anymore, unfortunately.
And have you ever seen any good examples of how a company can demonstrate to you guys so there's no conflicts and issues for that they're paying the people the way that they would need to and intend to volunteer that labor, but it is paid to the prevailing wage to the employee?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, are you asking, has that ever occurred?
No, is there, that seems to be the challenging point, as I understood it from you, that to make sure that that happens, to avoid any issues. So is there anything that makes it easy to overcome that challenge so that more companies can be aware and say, hey, if you follow this process, this is how it goes smoothly, if you're willing to do this for us?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, to my knowledge, we haven't had anything that's worked out, because once a company owner hears that, they're not interested. It's not something that they're willing to do. The process by which they'd have to go through, I don't have the answer, but it would have to be documented. And we'd have to be able to demonstrate, and the owner would have to be able to demonstrate that the employees were paid.
Okay, thanks for engaging.
Commissioner Ramsey.
Thank you so much, Director. Just looking at this, over the last 8 years, we've received 8.8 million. I'm just curious about the trend over time. I know grants are very willy-nilly, so are we plateauing, going up, going down?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Ramsey, another very good question. I would say the trend is in the wrong direction, and it's been in the wrong direction for some time. Back when I first started with the department, there were a number of bond acts that were passed at the state level, park bond acts. Prop 13, Prop 40, and then more recently Prop 68. But back in the day when we had those first bond acts, there was more what's called per capita money, and so you could apply based on your population, and there was more available. Prop 68 had a very small amount of per capita, but the rest was competitive, and although it was hundreds of millions of dollars, they got billions of requests statewide. And part of that is we're not alone in having infrastructure that needs improvement, number one. There are many communities that don't have the immense park system that we have, so we're also not as needy as some communities, and therefore when it comes to competition, we're down there further. And then similarly at the federal level, the rules around granting programs are increasingly strict and focused, rightly so on a lot of levels, for communities and neighborhoods of greatest need. And so the competition is even more and more steep. And there have been times, although the rules for some of these federal grants recently changed, that if you received a grant in the past, you're not eligible in the future. So we had, years and years ago, I think, $50,000 grant for Dwight Murphy Field, which for a while disqualified us from asking for any more funds. And today, $50,000 might be really good to help support Plaza Del Mar Bandshell, but will do nothing for a major renovation of a park. As a local agency, there is the perspective among the private sector and nonprofit foundation community that the city should pay for all these things. And to some extent, that's true, but there's only so much to go around, and their city has a lot of needs. So the ways in which the city's beginning to look at generating more funding, more recently, the council approved a bond measure to raise funds to build the police station. Some portion of that bond measure will support Dwight Murphy Field. So it's hard to know, frankly, where we're going, and we're always on the lookout for opportunities, but we always have to fit within this framework. And if we don't fit, and it's harder for us to fit, even though there is a need in Santa Barbara, it's difficult. There is more and more money, as one can imagine, for wildfire. 10 years ago, there was none. 20 years ago, there was lots of money for stormwater. Now it's climate action, and some stormwater, and some parks. But more agencies, have more money for wildfire. So we're able and have been successful, and they're competitive grants. They're not sort of, hey, you get $4 million. Because of how the city has positioned itself with its community wildfire protection plan, all the work that we've done to be eligible to secure those funds. So it just changes. The interest of the community, the interest of the state, the national interest is constantly evolving. But in general, for park improvement projects, it's pretty tough.
Thank you for that detailed overview. Just a quick follow-up. Reading through this, I saw no mention of fundraising events. Is that something the park is able to do to reach out to the general public of the community?
Yeah, so Chair McGill and Commissioner Ramsey, Park has in the past done that. Back in the day, long before my time, they used to be able to have these sort of major fundraising events, and it was a different time in Santa Barbara back then. And then more recently, we used to do more what we called friend-raising events. We did an urban wine trail event, which raised a little bit of money for Park and helped support our Chef Apprentice program or some small program. But the amount of work effort, which was largely borne by city staff to put on the event, was far greater than the amount of revenue that was received. Park is talking more about how to build community understanding and knowledge about what the Park Foundation does, with the idea that it will generate more interest. We have in the past talked about, and you've seen this, I'm sure, from other nonprofits, setting up an opportunity for people to leave money to Park in their will, in memory of themselves or their friend, or if they have an estate that they're willing to disperse. We haven't actively approached that. We have had individuals leave money to the city that we had no idea they were doing that. So we got funds for the Municipal Tennis Center, and then also Alice K. Park Memorial Garden. It's like, oh, this is great. It's Santa Barbara is full of nonprofit foundations, for those of you who've been around for a while, so there's also a lot of competition for those funds. Our work to raise funds for the Cabrillo Pavilion were moderately successful. Part of it had to do with timing, part of it had to do with the fire, and then, the floods, and, the Montecito mudslides, and just, there's various reasons. One of the things that I think is really valuable is, even if it's a small grant, that if it's a contribution from a community foundation or from a private individual, it demonstrates civic engagement and interest in renovating. So sometimes it's almost like it helps us leverage other sources of support by that demonstration. And so the gifts that we got for the band shell helped elevate the importance of that project and bring more money forward.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Price.
First of all, thank you very much for pulling together this data. I know that trying to corral disparate sources of data with people maintaining it in different ways is very difficult, so thank you very much for that work. Also, thank you, Commissioner Ramsey, for taking all of my questions. That was really great stuff. I kind of have two questions. First of all, a point of inquiry, what is the Chef Apprentice program?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Price, this is a program, I can't, don't quote me on this, but I think it was going for at least a decade. And where we offered youth in high school the opportunity to learn how to cook. And we had a Monday evening at the Franklin Center and a Wednesday evening at the West Side Center. We had a local chef sort of lead the event and then also support staff. And essentially it was a free program. They could apply, they'd get accepted, and every Monday or Wednesday they'd learn how to cook something new. Initially for some time, and it's more than 10 years now that I'm thinking back, they would then have an event. And so when we had the urban wine trail event, they would prepare the hors d'oeuvres and serve the hors d'oeuvres. And they're done, within the guise of a commercial kitchen, so everything was legit. And then we transitioned to, they would host a dinner at the end of their session for their family and friends, and people would buy tickets. And that funding would then go into the fund that's held by Park to fund the next year's session. We actually ended that program after the 2024 season for a couple of reasons. One, the chef we were working with retired or stopped doing that. His key member, and we mentioned that member of staff, Anita Ho, last month, was at the point where she was no longer able to work. And then it became a program that needed to sort of be reassessed and reappraised. So we're in that phase. Ideally, we'd love to have a summer camp culinary arts program at the West Side Center. We have a commercial kitchen there, but we need to make sure we can put it together. We need to have someone who will run it. It'll cost money, so either we have to subsidize it, or it's gonna be a fee for that program. So it was a great program while it lasted, but we're now sort of in this what do we do next phase.
And part two was it sounds like Park is becoming increasingly more important to the work that you do. What ways do you think that we can support that organization?
Chair McGill, Commissioner Price, and Chair McGill can also answer this question if she so chooses. The best way to advance an organization is for people to know about it and the outreach associated with it. When you have a small foundation like Park of volunteers, there's only so much bandwidth to do that. It would be great to have like a joint event of the commission in Park or the department in Park, and a way to promote our annual, just like at the end of every year, every organization wants their annual gift, the annual gift process. If you have contacts in the community that are, and business contacts, we have had businesses that may want to donate stuff, that there's an avenue for them to do that. Or people that are interested in supporting a park, or park improvement, that people know there's an avenue for do that. I mean, just like learning about there's a commission you can serve on. It's like, how do you get that word out so people know how to do that? And the balance is between what we as the city staff do, because it's a departmental, the city's paying for us, versus what a foundation does, always struggling with how to make both of those things work. I don't know if that's a great answer, but we can, as we have initiatives that we do, clearly sharing that with the commission. You have community contacts, you have lives that you lead throughout it, and or you hear someone saying, I really wish I could help make X happen. It's like, oh, well, the city has this nonprofit foundation arm. You don't have to give the money to the city, because sometimes there's this reluctance to do that, because they're like, where's it gonna go? How do I make sure it won't get, squandered or frittered away? I would say, which is tangential, or sort of tangential, one of the areas where if we had the opportunity for endowments or trusts for specific parks, like we do for the Douglas Family Preserve and Parma Park Trust, that is the best way for us to guarantee maintenance and projects moving forward. And so really it has to resonate with someone that that's what they're interested in. Just like the Russ Morrison Golf Fund. It resonates with a number of people. That's why we build this source of funding, and then we can disperse it in ways that help support that. So if there are, and Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden is a perfect example. We had a bequest for that. People that love that park, it's like, well, you know, what kind of legacy would you like to leave? Here's a way to leave a legacy if you'd like to leave a legacy. We sometimes get people that you know, want a legacy and they want a bench or a plaque or whatever it is. And really what we really want is people that just want to give. Because once we say we're going to make a park improvement in honor of their legacy, then all of a sudden we're tied to this park improvement, whether it makes sense or not to do that park improvement. Sometimes that's hard for people to understand, just like skate park. So when we get to community fundraising for Ortega Park, there is a giant skating community, and there's lots of parents of skaters or parents that were skaters. When it resonates with someone, that's when we would be looking at, is this something you want to invest in because you value it as an individual and you want the community to benefit from a new, you know, recreation program or service or a park improvement?
All right, did I take you out? I mean, I don't have a lot to add to that. It really is, as much as anything, it's visibility in a competitive world. And where, I mean, I think it's where, particularly as we talk about specific projects and needs in this commission, you know, to the degree that we can make direct links to park and how the two could work together and create that visibility here, that would be a way to help. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Okay, and then we'll go to Commissioner Aldana, then Nielsen.
Okay, 2 questions. On the chef apprenticeship program, were the kids, were they getting college credit also? Like if they went to the city college, were they?
Chair McGill and Commissioner O'Donnell, no, they weren't. We did have some of the chef apprentices go on and do the culinary program at City College, and then carry on. I mean, part of the idea was to give them a skill, similar to our youth apprentice program. So we have a youth apprentice program where we have kids that apply and they sort of learn sort of basic job skills, and then we place them in a city department. It's often our department, and they get paid. The chef apprentices didn't get paid. They took home dinner once a week and then also supplies. But they could, in theory, be able to speak to the fact that they'd been through this experience if they then went on to City College, or they wanted to find a job in a restaurant, for example. It had nothing to do with education, but had to do with, you know, finding a way to generate income.
Okay. And you are open to continuing it?
Chair McGill, Commissioner O'Donnell, it really depends on what that means. So whenever we have a program or service, we always, and we do that as part of our budget, frankly, is what are we doing? How are we doing it? Is it still a priority? If it's a priority, is it a subsidized program? So that's one of the things we'll talk more about when we get to budget, is what our subsidies are and why we have different subsidies, what our cost recovery policy is, how much staff time does it take to implement that program? Is that the right use of those staff, knowing that by and large, there's more to do than there are people to do the tasks. So potentially, yes, if we could figure out a way to make it happen, particularly if we had, particularly, we would only do it if we had a third party actually run the program, just like with so many of our summer camps. Because we don't have the bandwidth or the ability to take it on ourselves.
Got it, thank you. And the last question, is it possible to get a sneak peek on what you're going to be applying for on Ortega Park?
Chair McGill, Commissioner O'Donnell, a sneak peek at the...
And what you're going to be applying for, you mentioned there was a grant, CDBG.
When we submit it, it'll become a public document. So it'll be very similar to what we've done in the past. But until we've pulled it all together, we don't really have anything to share.
Got it, thank you.
And Commissioner Nielsen.
Director Zachary, over the last, the timeline of this report, have there been parcels or work with organizations like the Santa Barbara Land Trust? The DFP is a good example of land coming under the park's purview. Are there other examples of that with aligned missions?
Sure. Chair McGill, Commissioner Nielsen, the best example we have is the Aurora Open Space, which is located, or you can access it either by the end of Allen Road, or we have the bridge that crosses the creek that's also now tied to the multimodal pathway. That parcel, which is 14 acres, or at least when it was acquired, it was 14 acres. The actual park itself is 20 because we already had 6 from another situation. The Trust for Public Land took the leadership role in beginning negotiating with the property owner for public acquisition. And that parcel was acquired through a variety of funds. It was both funds that TPL brought forward. We also got funds from the State Coastal Conservancy. We used Measure B funds, so Creeks funds, to buy it. And so there was like a culmination of those 3. If you look back in the history, and I'm actually working on this little presentation for the Foundation Roundtable, Santa Barbara's most notable public spaces that we have essentially were gifted to the city between 1903 and the 70s. And I could give you the laundry list of what they are. We don't have that happening so much anymore. After that, sort of the next period is the city had bond funds to buy, like Shoreline Park was funded through a bond fund in 1968. Different ways that properties have come into the city, where the city's acquired them or acquired them for very, very little money. If we had an organization that approached us, and we have worked with the Land Trust for Santa Barbara County, they actually held a conservation easement over a portion of the Douglas County Preserve when it was still a Wilcox property, which they vacated when the property came into city ownership. We always talk with them, and they're less interested in becoming owners or easement owners over urban parkland. They're more interested in the open spaces and that kind of thing. So it could be that if someone approached them, they would then, direct them to the city. Oftentimes, people want us to actually buy the property, and that's not something that we often have the capacity to do. But if there was an interest, we never have a closed door for consideration, particularly if it connects to existing open space or an existing parkland or some other reason. And sometimes maybe there is a way to finance acquisition. So always open to the discussion, but we haven't had anything happen recently other than the Aurora Open Space.
Thank you.
All right, great, thanks, God, great education on how this all works and the complexities of how it all works. I think that takes us out, so thank you, everybody, thank you, and thanks for putting these reports together, Ms. Carlson. With that, I will adjourn the meeting, and we will see everybody next month.